On a quiet Thanksgiving weekend in 1991, a shocking crime unfolded behind the doors of a modest apartment in Costa Mesa, California. What began as a picture of an unlikely romance, a young Egyptian-born model and her wealthy older husband, ended in unimaginable horror. When police arrived, they found a gruesome scene, a dismembered body, severed hands fried in oil, and whispered claims of abuse and self-defense. What drove Omaima Nelson, a 23-year-old with a troubled past, to commit such a brutal act? Was she a victim fighting back against years of torment, or a cold-blooded predator who saw her husband as nothing more than a means to an end? As the investigation unraveled, shocking details emerged, deep psychological scars, and a history of manipulation. But how much of her story was true? What led to this display of violence, and who was Omaima Nelson beneath the surface? Prepare to step into a world of dark secrets, unanswered questions, and a chilling quest to uncover the truth. What really happened that fateful weekend? And could anyone have seen it coming? Welcome to the Crime Series. I'm glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you're watching from. Omaima Nelson was born in 1968 in Cairo, Egypt, a city steeped in history and culture but also marked by stark socio-economic divides. She grew up as one of 16 children in an impoverished household, living in a neighborhood adjacent to Cairo's vast necropolis, a sprawling city of the dead, where tombs as homes for the poor. This harsh environment shaped the foundation of Omaima's early life, embedding deep scars that would later emerge in chilling ways. From an early age, Omaima's life was marked by physical and emotional suffering. Her father, reportedly a violent man, inflicted frequent beatings on his children, including Omaima. Her family adhered to cultural practices that further exacerbated her pain. At the age of 6, Omaima was subjected to female genital mutilation, FGM, a traumatic and life-altering experience that would leave lasting physical and psychological scars. FGM, a common practice in some parts of Egypt. This act not only caused her intense physical pain, but also contributed to lifelong trauma surrounding her sexuality and intimate relationships. Despite her harsh upbringing, Omaima was described as an intelligent and strikingly beautiful young girl. By her late teens, Omaima became acutely aware of the limited prospects available to her in Cairo. When an opportunity arose to marry an older American man, Roger Stainbrook, and move to the United States in 1986, she seized it, viewing it as a chance to escape her harsh reality and start anew. This move would prove to be a pivotal turning point in her life, opening the door to possibilities, but also setting her on a path toward an even darker future. Their marriage served as her entry point to a new life in America, but it was short-lived. The couple soon divorced, leaving Omaima to navigate life in the U.S. on her own. After the divorce, Omaima stayed in Southern California, where she navigated her way through the challenges of adapting to a vastly different culture and lifestyle. Though she lacked financial stability and a strong support system, her striking beauty and charm quickly made her a presence in the social scene. She began working as a nanny for affluent families, and later as a model, gracing advertisements and small gigs that showcased her exotic appeal. These roles allowed her to experience a taste of the glamour and prosperity she had long dreamed of. Omaima's relationships during her early years in the U.S. were often transactional in nature. Her beauty and youth attracted affluent older men, and she quickly learned to use these relationships to secure housing, money, and other necessities. It was during this period that she adopted aliases like Ishta or Nadia, adding an air of mystique to her identity. Despite her efforts to create stability, Omaima's life remained tumultuous. She was involved in several volatile relationships, some of which ended with allegations of violence and theft. One particularly alarming incident occurred in 1990 when a boyfriend accused her of tying him to a bed under the guise of consensual intimacy, only to then threaten him with a weapon and attempt to rob him. While she was not formally charged in that case, it highlighted a pattern of manipulation and opportunism that would later be scrutinized in court. In October 1991, Omaima Nelson crossed paths with 56-year-old William Bill Nelson at a bar in Huntington Beach, California. Their meeting marked the beginning of a whirlwind romance that would eventually culminate in one of the most infamous crimes in Orange County's history. Bill Nelson was a man with a checkered history. Born in the United States, he had built a career as a pilot and later worked as a computer programmer. However, his professional life was marred by legal troubles. Bill had served 4 years in federal prison for attempting to smuggle over 100 tons of marijuana into the United States from Mexico. Despite his criminal past, Bill sought to rebuild his life after his release, settling in Costa Mesa, California. A larger-than-life figure, Bill was known for his gregarious personality, financial acumen, and ability to charm those around him. At 6'4" and 230 pounds, he was physically imposing, which likely added to his confidence and charisma. Within days of their meeting, the pair claimed to have married in an Egyptian-style ceremony performed over the phone by a priest. The ceremony's legitimacy was later called into question, as there were no official records of their marriage in either Las Vegas or Phoenix, where they claimed the ceremony had taken place. Regardless, both presented themselves as husband and wife, and Omaima moved into Bill's Costa Mesa apartment. The 33-year age difference between Omaima and Bill was stark. For Omaima, who had endured a turbulent upbringing and lacked a stable family structure, Bill represented a figure of authority and provision. However, this dynamic also introduced an imbalance of power. Bill, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention of a much younger woman. Some who knew him speculated that he enjoyed the control he held over Omaima, not only as an older, more experienced partner, but also as someone who could provide financial stability and material luxuries. Despite the outward appearance of a happy, newlywed couple, there were early signs of discord. Bill's acquaintances noted that he was unusually possessive and jealous, often keeping Omaima close and discouraging her from interacting with others. Similarly, Omaima's demeanor reportedly changed in subtle ways, with some friends observing that she seemed more reserved and less confident than before meeting Bill. Although they had been together for only a few weeks, their relationship quickly became volatile. Omaima later alleged that Bill's behavior behind closed doors was far from the affectionate and supportive image he portrayed in public. By Thanksgiving week, the couple's relationship had reached a breaking point. Omaima's mounting fear and resentment, combined with her history of reacting violently to perceived threats, set the stage for the horrifying events that would unfold. The events of Thanksgiving Day, November 28, 1991, marked the horrifying culmination of Omaima and Bill Nelson's tumultuous 3-week marriage. The day began like any other in their Costa Mesa apartment, but it would end in a brutal and gruesome crime that shocked the nation.
As we go into the most intense part of this video, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. It gives me motivation to create more videos. If you love this video and wish to see more, kindly subscribe.
According to Omaima Nelson, the violence began early that morning when Bill attempted to force her into a sexual act she did not consent to. She claimed that this was part of a pattern of abuse and that Bill had repeatedly raped and physically assaulted her during their brief marriage. On this occasion, she alleged that he tied her to the bed as part of a bondage scenario and then raped her. She claimed that she was overwhelmed by fear and rage. She claimed that Bill's aggression triggered memories of the abuse she had endured as a child and left her feeling powerless. Desperate to escape, she said she managed to break free of her restraints, and in a frenzy of self-defense, she fought back against her husband. Omaima said she reached for a lamp on the bedside table and struck Bill over the head, temporarily incapacitating him. As he struggled, she grabbed a pair of scissors and began stabbing him repeatedly. As Bill lay dying, Omaima's rage and fear reportedly consumed her. She retrieved an iron from the room and struck him repeatedly, ensuring he could no longer harm her. The sheer brutality of the attack suggested that she was not merely trying to subdue her husband, but was unleashing years of pent-up anger and trauma. The violence did not end with Bill's death. After killing him, Omaima began a process that would horrify investigators and the public alike. She dismembered her husband, a task that took her an estimated 12 hours. Using scissors, kitchen knives, and other tools, she methodically separated his limbs from his torso. She decapitated him and removed his hands, boiling them in oil to destroy his fingerprints. She also killed him, later claiming this was an act of revenge for his sexual assaults. In the hours following Bill's death, Omaima attempted to dispose of his body in various ways. She placed some of his remains in garbage bags and mixed them with leftover Thanksgiving turkey, hoping to disguise them. She also ran parts of his body through the garbage disposal, which neighbors reported hearing running for hours. Investigators later discovered blood and human tissue clogging the disposal unit. Omaima stored other body parts in her freezer. In a desperate attempt to rid herself of the remaining evidence, Omaima drove Bill's red Corvette around Costa Mesa, carrying garbage bags filled with body parts. She visited several acquaintances and former boyfriends, asking for their assistance in disposing of the remains. One of these individuals, Jose Esquivel, Omaima arrived at his home covered in blood and visibly distraught. She showed him the contents of the garbage bags, pieces of Bill's dismembered body, and asked for his help in dumping them. In exchange, she offered him $75,000 and some household appliances. Esquivel, horrified by what he saw, pretended to agree, but quickly alerted the police. Another man, Richard Gray, also visited by Omaima that same weekend. She approached him with a similar request, but he refused to listen to her story and demanded she leave his property. Like Esquivel, Gray contacted authorities, further raising suspicions about Omaima's behavior. Responding to Esquivel's tip, Costa Mesa police officers arrived at Omaima and Bill Nelson's apartment on Eldon Street. The scene they encountered was nothing short of horrifying. Blood was splattered across the walls, floors, and furniture, suggesting a violent struggle had occurred. The apartment was in complete disarray, with evidence of the murder and dismemberment scattered throughout the space. As investigators conducted their search, they uncovered a nightmarish array of evidence. They found large trash bags containing Bill Nelson's dismembered body parts, including his internal organs. In the refrigerator, officers discovered Bill's severed head wrapped in aluminum foil, alongside other body parts. His hands were submerged in a deep fryer filled with cooking oil, and investigators noted that they had been partially cooked. In the kitchen, a large soup pot contained boiled human remains, believed to be parts of Bill's head. The garbage disposal was clogged with tissue and small bone fragments, and neighbors reported hearing the appliance running for hours in the days leading up to the discovery. Forensic experts later confirmed that the clogged disposal contained pieces of Bill's flesh, further solidifying the grim reality of what had transpired in the apartment. Investigators also found Bill's prized red Corvette parked near the apartment. Inside, they discovered additional garbage bags containing more of his dismembered remains, indicating that Omaima had been attempting to transport parts of his body elsewhere. The car's interior was smeared with blood, further implicating Omaima in the crime. On December 2, 1991, police arrested Omaima Nelson on suspicion of murder. During her initial questioning, she provided conflicting accounts of what had happened. At first, she claimed that intruders had broken into the apartment, murdered Bill, and attempted to frame her. She alleged that these unknown individuals had killed her husband while she was incapacitated. When investigators pressed her on the implausibility of her story, Omaima changed her account, stating that she had killed Bill in self-defense. She described years of physical and sexual abuse, culminating in a violent altercation on Thanksgiving Day. Omaima claimed that she fought back in fear and rage, ultimately killing her husband to protect herself. As the investigation unfolded, Omaima underwent a series of psychological evaluations. Forensic psychiatrists interviewed her to assess her mental state and understand the motivations behind her actions. During these sessions, she described her abusive past, including the trauma she endured in Egypt and the alleged abuse she suffered at Bill's hands. She also confessed to hearing voices and experiencing a dissociative state during the murder and dismemberment. Psychiatrists noted that Omaima exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and possible psychosis. They suggested that her actions, particularly the dismemberment and alleged cannibalism, were indicative of severe psychological disturbances. However, the prosecution argued that her behavior demonstrated a calculated and deliberate attempt to cover up the crime, rather than a psychotic break. News of the crime quickly spread, drawing intense media attention. The gruesome details of the murder, combined with allegations of dismemberment and cannibalism, captivated the public and painted Omaima as a modern-day Black Widow. The case became a media sensation, with headlines emphasizing the bizarre and macabre elements of the crime. By the time the investigation concluded, law enforcement had built a compelling case against Omaima Nelson. The physical evidence, her conflicting statements, and the testimony of those she had approached for help painted a picture of a calculated and premeditated crime. The trial of Omaima Nelson in December 1992 was one of the most sensational and bizarre cases in California's history. Packed courtrooms, headlines blaring macabre details, and intense media scrutiny turned the proceedings into a spectacle. The trial not only sought to determine whether Omaima Nelson was guilty of murder. The prosecution portrayed Omaima Nelson as a cunning and manipulative woman who preyed on older, wealthier men for financial gain. They argued that her marriage to Bill Nelson was never about love, but rather a calculated move to gain access to his assets. Deputy District Attorney Randolph Pulaski painted her as a predator who had lured Bill into a false sense of security before brutally killing and dismembering him. The prosecution pointed to Omaima's conflicting accounts of the murder. These inconsistencies, they argued, undermined her credibility. The prosecution also downplayed Omaima's claims of abuse, suggesting that there was no concrete evidence to support her allegations. Bill Nelson's ex-wife, Kathy Nelson, testified that he had never been abusive during their marriage. Furthermore, medical examinations of Omaima, conducted after her arrest, showed no signs of recent sexual or physical trauma. The defense, led by Deputy Public Defender Thomas Mooney, presented Omaima Nelson as a deeply traumatized woman who had been driven to kill her husband in a desperate act of self-defense. Mooney argued that Omaima had endured a lifetime of abuse. The defense highlighted the impact of Omaima's upbringing in Egypt, including the trauma of female genital mutilation, which made sexual intercourse painful and emotionally distressing. They argued that Bill's alleged assaults re-traumatized her, causing her to act in self-preservation. Omaima took the stand in her own defense, delivering emotional testimony about her life and the events leading up to the murder. She described her marriage to Bill as a nightmare, marked by humiliation, violence, and constant fear. She also admitted to dismembering his body, but insisted that she had done so in a state of dissociation, driven by the need to protect herself and hide the evidence of her actions. After weeks of testimony, the jury faced a difficult decision. Ultimately, the jury rejected the defense's argument of self-defense, finding Omaima guilty of second-degree murder. They concluded that while the killing may not have been premeditated, the brutality of her actions and her behavior afterward suggested something far more sinister than a moment of desperation. On January 12, 1993, Omaima Nelson was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison, the maximum sentence for second-degree murder. The judge noted the extreme violence of her actions, describing them as beyond anything the court had ever encountered. The prosecution expressed satisfaction with the verdict, while the defense maintained that Omaima's actions were misunderstood and rooted in trauma. Following her conviction for the second-degree murder of her husband, Bill Nelson, Omaima Nelson began serving her sentence of 27 years to life in prison. Omaima was initially incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, one of the largest women's prisons in the United States. There, she began the difficult process of adjusting to life in prison. Despite her notoriety as a convicted killer, she largely kept a low profile during her early years of incarceration. However, the gruesome details of her crime ensured that she was regarded with a mix of fear and fascination by fellow inmates and prison staff. By the early 2000s, Omaima claimed to have experienced a religious transformation. She announced that she had become a born-again Christian, a decision that she said was motivated by her desire to seek forgiveness for her past actions. She began attending religious services and participating in Bible study groups, often expressing remorse for the pain she had caused. In interviews, she claimed that her newfound faith gave her a sense of purpose and hope, even as she faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. In an unexpected twist, Omaima married while incarcerated. During the mid-2000s, she reportedly formed a relationship with a man in his 70s who became one of her pen pals. The two exchanged letters and participated in conjugal visits, a privilege that is granted to some prisoners in California. While the details of their relationship remain largely private, it was reported that her husband passed away a few years later, leaving her widowed for the second time. This development further fueled speculation about Omaima's ability to manipulate those around her. Critics argued that her marriage was another example of her using her charm to gain support and resources, even while imprisoned. Omaima Nelson became eligible for parole in 2006, but her initial request was denied. During her parole hearing, commissioners expressed serious concerns about her lack of accountability and her potential danger to society. They described her as unpredictable and a serious threat to public safety. In 2011, Omaima applied for parole again. At this hearing, she claimed that she had been fully rehabilitated and was no longer a danger to others. She reiterated her claims of self-defense, arguing that her actions were the result of years of abuse and psychological trauma. However, the parole board was not convinced. Commissioners pointed to the extreme violence of her crime as evidence of her inability to conform to societal norms. Ultimately, the board denied her parole, stating that she remained a danger to society. Omaima will not be eligible for parole again until 2026.